I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005. For my degree in animation, it wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't. But it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would shit themselves over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they get aired. I'll get right to it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sap of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season. But the delay lasts longer for a more than upsetting reason. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that sets everyone and everything back for several months. Me and two other interns were in the editing room along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received that there was supposed to be the fear of the Krabby Patty copy and gather around the screen and watch. Now, given that it wasn't the final yet, animators often put up the mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us with phony. Oftentimes, lead titles such as How Sex Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye Bella Vide, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work related chuckles. So when we saw the title card that says Squidward Suicide, we didn't think it more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throats laughing at it. The happy-go-lucky music play as normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like a normal one. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down. He has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy and Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up, and then we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things start to begin to seem off. While playing, the few frames repeat itself, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is psyched up with animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finish as if the skips never happened. There's a slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo at him. Like for real, booing at him. Well, not normal cartoon booing that is a comment in the show, but you could very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward in the full frame that looks very visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd with the SpongeBob in the center frame. He was booing too. Very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing though. What is odd is that everyone had a hyper-realistic eyes. Very detailed, clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us look at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward, sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of the night sky, so it isn't a very long after the concert. A sadly part is that at the point there is no sound, literally no sound, not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It is as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He's just sitting there blinking in silence for about 30 seconds. He started to sob softly. He put his hands, tentacles, over his eyes, quietly for the full minutes there. All the while, the sound in the background very slowly from growing from nothing to barely audible to the sound like a slight breeze through the forest. The screen slowly began to zoom on his face. By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at the shots for 10 seconds apart side by side. The sobbing gets louder. The more full the hurts and anger, the screen then twitches a bit, as if it's twists on itself. For a split second, then back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm was brewing somewhere. The eerie part is that the sound, as Squidward's sobbing, sounded real. As if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes. The sound was coming through the other side. As good as the sound as the studio likes to have, they didn't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce sound of that quality. Below the wind and sobbing very faint. Oh, it came at an on interviews never lasted for more than a second. Did a hard time pinning it. We watched this show twice, so pardon if things sounded too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen, as if a sign frame was replaced. So, the lead animation either paused or rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and blooded, one eye dangling over his upturned face. Pop, he was naked down into his underwear. His stomach clearly cut open, his entrails lying beside him. He was lying on some pavement that was probably on the road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of a photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for the shot designed to be the evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward still sobbing louder than before, half body and frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down to his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in hyper-realistic style. Looking as if you touch it, you get the blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if of a gale blowing through the forest. There was even a snapping sound of branches. The laughing, the deep, brutal, lasting longer interviews and coming more frequently. For about 20 seconds, the screen began to twitch and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were. But he know that he had to. This time the photo was sent what appears to be about a little girl no older than the first child. She was lying on the porch. Her benefits in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out and popped, naked except for underpants. Her entrails were paled, and on top of her above another cruel cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street, and a photographer's shadow was visible, very similar to the size of a shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit. And one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. After about 5 seconds, The second photo played. Squidward was silent, as did all sounds. Like it was when this scene started. He put his tentacles down and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism. Like the others in the beginning of this episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, pulsing. He's just staring at the screen, as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing. This time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud. The most fear-inducing of all his sobbings was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. At this time, there was a still photo lasted for the good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and back up. This time, the photo was a boy about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out of the stomach, wounded by a large hand. The right eye popped and dangling, blood tracking down in it. And the animator proceeded. It's hard to believe. The next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. He was on the next, the same thing. He went back in the first and played him quicker, and I lost him. I vomited on the floor. The animating and sound editors were gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from the video. We saw the hand slowly lift out of the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kids begin to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down there. So the editor just continued this episode. Once a few frames were shown, all screaming, all sounds again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the view. Full frame of the face for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out, and that deep voice said, "Do it." And we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately puts a gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brains matter splatters the wall behind him and his bed, and he files back with the force. The last 5 seconds of the episode show his body on the bed on his side, one eye dangling, and what's left on his head above the floor, staring blankly at him. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hellenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most people left at the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to important the entirety of it in my mind. It caused me a horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory that we could think of it was a file was edited by someone in a chain from the drawing studio in here. From the drawing studio to here, the CTO was called in to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by the new material. However, the timestamp of it was mere 24 seconds before we began to viewing it. All equipment involved in the exam for foreign softwares and hardwares, as well as glitches. And as if the timestamps may have glitched or showed the wrong time, but everything was checked out fine. We didn't know what happened, and to this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the matter of the photos. Nothing came of it. No child has seen it was unidentified. No clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. I have never believed this unexplainable phenomena before. But now I have something happen and I can't prove anything about it beyond incidental evidence. I think twice before things.